He was responsible for the deaths of up to 40 million people, a staggering 10% of the world's population at the time. Yet, this same man forged one of the largest contiguous land empires in human history, connecting east and west like never before. So who was Genghis Khan? Was he a bloodthirsty monster, a genocidal tyrant whose name was whispered in fear from the Pacific to the Mediterranean? Or was he the visionary architect of the modern world, a unifier who laid the groundwork for centuries of progress? This is the story of a man whose legacy is so vast, so contradictory, that history itself still struggles to pass a final judgment. It's a tale of unparalleled brutality and unprecedented stability, of scorched earth and flourishing trade. To understand our world today, we must first understand the paradox of Genghis Khan. Born as Temujin around 1162 on the harsh, unforgiving steppes of Mongolia, his early life was a brutal struggle for survival. His father, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by a rival tribe when Temujin was just a boy. His own clan, seeing him as a weak and worthless heir, abandoned him, his mother and his siblings, leaving them to fend for themselves in the wilderness. They were outcasts, living on the edge of starvation, hunting marmots and gathering roots. He was captured, enslaved, and forced to wear a wooden collar. Every day was a fight for his next meal, his next breath. This crucible of hardship didn't break him. It forged him into a leader of incredible resilience, cunning, and ambition. He learned that on the steppe, loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold, and that survival depended not on birthright, but on strength and the ability to unite others under a single banner. Step by painful step, through strategic alliances, sheer force of will, and ruthless victories, Temujin began to unite the scattered, warring Mongol tribes. By 1206, he had achieved the impossible. At a grand assembly, or Kurultai, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler of all the Mongols. The boy who was once an outcast was now the master of the steppes. But his ambition didn't end there. He looked beyond the horizon, and the world would soon learn to tremble at his name. When we think of Genghis Khan, the first image that often comes to mind is one of overwhelming, terrifying destruction, and for good reason. The Mongol conquests were among the most brutal in human history. Cities that dared to resist were not just conquered, they were annihilated. Their populations were systematically slaughtered, their walls were razed to the ground, and their fields were sown with salt. The historical accounts are chilling. In cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Herat, chroniclers describe mountains of skulls and rivers running red with blood. The city of Nishapur, after Genghis Khan's son-in-law was killed during the siege, was subjected to an act of horrifying revenge. Every living thing, down to the cats and dogs, was reportedly killed. The goal was not just victory, it was to spread terror so absolute that other cities would surrender without a fight. This psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. Fear of the Mongol horde traveled faster than the horde itself. Entire regions depopulated as people fled in panic. By some estimates, the population of Persia may have dropped by as much as 75% due to the Mongol invasions. From a modern perspective, these acts are undeniably monstrous. They represent warfare at its most savage, a seemingly endless campaign of death and destruction on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. He was by this measure a villain of epic proportions. But here is where the story takes a sharp, confounding turn. Out of the ashes of these brutal conquests rose an era of unprecedented peace and stability known as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Once the empire was established, the very same iron fist that had crushed its enemies was now used to enforce a strict and absolute order across its vast domain. The constant petty warfare that had plagued Central Asia for centuries simply ceased. Genghis Khan understood that a secure empire was a prosperous one. He mercilessly hunted down the bandits and pirates who had made travel a deadly gamble. The result was that the trade routes, particularly the legendary Silk Road, became safer than they had been in 1,000 years. A famous saying from the era claimed that a maiden carrying a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely from one end of the empire to the other. This newfound security reignited transcontinental trade on an unimaginable scale. For the first time, goods, ideas, and cultures could flow freely between China, the Middle East, and Europe. This wasn't an accidental byproduct of conquest, it was deliberate policy. The Mongols protected merchants, built and maintained a sophisticated road network, and established a system of relay stations that ensured rapid communication and travel across their territories. So, the same man whose armies had destroyed some of the world's greatest cities was also the one who created the conditions for a golden age of commerce and connection. It's a paradox that lies at the very heart of his legacy. Let's dig deeper into this contradiction. On one hand, you have the utter destruction of cultural centers. The Mongols, in their initial conquests, were not builders, they were destroyers. The magnificent library of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, was thrown into the Tigris River, its ink said to have turned the water black for days. Countless works of science, philosophy, and art were lost forever. They toppled civilizations that had stood for centuries, wiping out generations of accumulated knowledge and heritage. The immediate impact was a cultural desert in many of the lands they conquered. But then look at the other side of the coin. By connecting the world, Genghis Khan's empire set the stage for one of the greatest periods of cultural and technological exchange in history. Chinese inventions like gunpowder, paper, printing, and the compass moved westward, where they would fundamentally transform European society and pave the way for the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. Similarly, Persian astronomy, Islamic mathematics, and European medicine traveled east. The Mongols themselves were highly adaptable. They didn't impose their own culture on their subjects. Instead, they recognized and utilized the skills of the people they conquered, employing Chinese engineers, Persian administrators, and European artisans. They fostered a cosmopolitan environment where different faiths and cultures coexisted. Genghis Khan himself decreed religious tolerance throughout his empire, a policy almost unheard of at the time. So, while he was responsible for destroying culture on a massive scale, he also inadvertently became history's greatest catalyst for cultural diffusion. How was this vast multicultural empire governed? Again, we see the duality of fear and order. The terror inspired by the Mongol armies was a key tool of control. The threat of annihilation kept rebellions in check, but fear alone cannot sustain an empire. Genghis Khan understood this. He established a unified and revolutionary legal code known as the Yassa. While the full text has been lost to history, its principles are well documented. The Yassa was strict, and its punishments were severe, often death for crimes like theft, adultery, and desertion. But it also contained remarkably progressive elements. It forbade the kidnapping of women. It granted diplomatic immunity to foreign ambassadors, and it created a system of taxation. Crucially, the law applied to everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest-ranking noble, including the Khan's own family. Perhaps most revolutionary was its emphasis on meritocracy. Genghis Khan promoted his generals and administrators based on skill and loyalty, not on their aristocratic birth or tribal affiliation. His most trusted commanders were often former enemies who had proven their worth in battle. This was a radical departure from the class-based societies of the time. He created a system where a common shepherd could rise to become a general, a concept that promoted fierce loyalty and maximized the talent within his empire. This framework of law and order, built on a foundation of merit, was the administrative genius that held his violent creation together. He was not just a conqueror, he was a nation builder on a continental scale. So we return to our original question: was Genghis Khan a monster or a visionary?